Here's a great yoga anatomy geeky question about side plank and the alignment of the bottom hand. So the question is, when we are in side plank, should we have the bottom hand directly underneath the bottom shoulder so that a line like from the shoulder to the wrist is a vertical line? Or should we instead scoot our hand forward a little bit so that when we come into side plank, instead of a vertical line, the line from the shoulder to the wrist kind of angles forward slightly. It's a really subtle difference, so it might not look like a big difference from afar, but that's basically what this question comes down to. And in my experience, this tends to be quite the controversial issue in the yoga world. And just to help illustrate that, I want to read a great question that I received from a confused yoga teacher, because I think that many of us will be able to relate to what she's asking about here. But she says, when transitioning from plank to side plank, I'm finding loads of conflicting information on hand position, and I'm so confused. Should the hand stay in the same position as plank, or should the hand on the side we are transitioning to be moved forward slightly? So this confused yoga teacher is confused because she was looking into this question and is just finding lots of conflicting information. And I have absolutely seen that myself as well. And I find that there tend to be many strong opinions about where the hand should be inside plank. And what this really comes down to, in my experience, is beliefs and ideas about keeping the shoulder safe and reducing the risk of injury. So most commonly in my experience, I tend to find that those in the camp that we should take the hand forward, they believe that taking the hand forward is safer than letting the hand be directly under the shoulder. So that's kind of what's going on there. And that's why if you're in yoga class and if you're in plank pose, and if the teacher is about to take everybody into side plank, you may hear, and this is definitely not everyone, it's not all yoga classes, but you may hear, if I'm going to go side plank on the left side, the teacher might say, take your left hand forward a little bit and then come into side plank. So it's this conscious adjustment that we're taught that we should do. And the idea is that it keeps the shoulder safe. So let's look at this using movement science, this great tool that we have to analyze this claim and to think about it critically to help, our scientific thinking minds, and just also to help improve our movement eyes so that we can learn to see movement a little clearer, kind of using the vehicle today of side plank. So first off, just a quick look at the anatomy and the biomechanics of side plank so that we're all on the same page about what we're talking about here. So side plank is a position in which we mainly embody Tadasana through most of our body. But then we take our arms out into, this is shoulder abduction, shoulder abduction, and it's roughly 90 degrees of shoulder abduction. So shoulder abduction is the direction of movement where our arms reach out and up. So really this full arc of movement all the way out and up is all abduction. But in side plank, we're in this position of 90 degrees-ish. And then the bottom hand in side plank, that wrist would be an extension. So side plank is like positionally, it's like this. But then, we're rotated in relation to gravity. So let's look a little more now at the biomechanics and the forces involved so we can help decipher what muscles are working. And we're just looking at the upper body here. Side plank is a whole body pose, but for our purposes today, we're just kind of mainly talking about the shoulder. So when it comes to the shoulder, what's doing the work in order to hold us there in that position of shoulder abduction? So here I am in side plank, and just to help our movement eyes kind of see and understand it maybe a little better, think about this question. What would happen here? So we're thinking this bottom arm. What would happen if I stopped working in my arm and really the whole body? If I just stopped working in side plank, what happens? I come down like this. Gravity just takes me down and I come down like this. But instead, in side plank, I work against gravity. I lift myself up and then I hold myself here. So the movement that's happening, the effort that's happening is going from this position here when I'm all the way down. Maybe your movement eyes can see that my bottom arm is in neutral with regard to abduction. I'm not really in any abduction here because my arm is by my side. But then to come up into side plank, I actively abduct the shoulder, and then I come here and I hold this isometrically. So it's active shoulder abduction that's happening, and it's the muscles of shoulder abduction that are doing the most work in that bottom arm in side plank. So I think that this matters and is helpful for us because we just want to analyze what's happening here. This question, the controversy that we have on our hand is in side plank, should the bottom wrist be like straight underneath the shoulder, or should the bottom wrist be a little bit forward? So straight under or a little bit forward. The claim is that if the wrist is straight under, that's injurious, that's going to injure the shoulder. But if we take it forward a little bit, then the shoulder is super safe. Like that's the idea here. And I just like to maybe suggest that we, in the interest of being scientifically thinking yogis, critically thinking yogis, we might want to take a step back and look at this question and just ask ourselves, is this question really the best question to be asking when it comes to shoulder safety in side plank? Could it really even be the case that wrist directly under shoulder is bad and injurious, and then wrist a little bit forward? We're talking, I don't even know how many degrees of movement that actually was in shoulder abduction, but maybe like 2 or something. Like shoulder abduction is all of this, that whole arc. But with side plank, we're talking it's here or it's here, something like that much of a difference. Could it really be the case that hand forward a little bit suddenly makes the shoulder super safe, but hand right underneath makes the shoulder super unsafe? Like, could that really be? So maybe just think a little bit critically about that. Now, I think it can also be really helpful when we're thinking about our yoga poses and the forces and the loads involved, the biomechanics. It could be super helpful to actually step outside of the yoga world and look to different movement modalities. My favorite when thinking about this stuff is strength training. Because with strength training, the loads involved become a little more obvious to our eyes. It's often in the form of weights we're holding. And when we analyze like similar strength training exercises to some of our yoga poses, sometimes the similarities can be really helpful in terms of understanding what's happening on the yoga mat. So if we know that side plank loads is like a pose, a movement that works the shoulder abductors, what if we go into the strength training world and we just ask, well, what strength training exercises work the shoulder abductors, like in this plane of movement? And we actually have a great strength training exercise to bring in here as an example, as a comparison, and that's called a full range lateral raise. Full range lateral raise. So I'm going to show it holding 2 dumbbells, but you start like this in neutral, and then you abduct your shoulders through their full range of motion all the way up and all the way back down. So this is an exercise in the strength training world, full range lateral raise. And in that exercise, we load the shoulders. So I'm holding the weight and I take the weight all the way out, which is tough because it becomes a long lever out there with the weight at the end of my hand, and then all the way up and all the way down. So full range lateral raises, they're hard and they really load our shoulders, and they load them through that full range of motion from down by our sides all the way up. And that was using both arms at the same time, but you can also do a full range lateral raise with one arm. And that might be just for our movement eyes, a little more specific to see when we're thinking about side plank. Because side plank, it's just the bottom arm that is loaded. The top arm is also in abduction, but the bottom arm is the one doing the work. So just to see, we can also do a full range lateral raise with a resistance band where we step on it and then we take that band out and all the way up. So I'd like to, point out that in the strength training world, nobody thinks of a lateral raise as dangerous or as a movement that is going to injure the shoulders, or that when we do the lateral range, like maybe we have to stop at a certain point, and if we go just a little bit further, that's bad for us, or vice versa, like maybe going further is better. These questions of it coming down to like a tiny bit of movement, being injurious or being safe. When it comes to like these full range lateral raises in the strength training world, we just go through the entire range of movement. And it's all fine. Like there's not a question about this tiny little few degrees of difference being safe or injurious. It's just not really something that would come up because that's not really how injury risk works. Injury risk isn't really so much about tiny differences in alignment. It's much more simply about load and whether the joint being loaded has the capacity to tolerate that load. So, in a lateral raise, maybe you wouldn't want to be lifting 50 pounds or something like in each hand. That probably would be too much. Honestly, you probably would just not be able to lift them. You just wouldn't be able to do it. But that wouldn't be very productive, Instead, you want to lift the amount of weight that you can actually lift. So, but in general, when we're talking about like injury and load, injury is a big, complex topic that we're not going to get into all the nuances here. Injuries are multifactorial. Many factors from the biopsychosocial realms can all influence injury risk. But if we're just looking biomechanically, because that's what this whole video is about, that's what this question is about in side plank, injury risk would have much less to do with this slight difference in alignment and much more to do with actually load. And the question would be, is the student in question, is their shoulder, does it have the capacity to tolerate the loads of side plank? It doesn't matter whether the hand is directly under the shoulder or whether the hand comes forward a little bit. Neither of those positions is inherently safer or more injurious. And like I said, in the strength training world, we load our arms all the way through the full range and we don't think twice about it. We don't have fear mongering about alignment there. So the better question to be asking if we're concerned about shoulder injury risk in side plank is not a question of a few degrees of alignment, wrist right underneath or wrist a little bit forward. That's not really the variable that matters for injury. The variable that matters for injury is how well adapted someone's shoulder joint is for the loads of the movement that they're about to do. How strong is the shoulder? Have they loaded the shoulder that way before? How long? How long have they done yoga? There are just so many questions there. It's a much bigger topic than simply, okay, everybody with the wrist right under the shoulder, they're going to injure their shoulder. And everybody with the wrist a little bit forward has a completely safe shoulder. No injury happens here. That's not the right question to be asking. Both of those positions load the shoulder, and both of them load the shoulder quite significantly. It's, a lot of work there. So for practice yogis who are strong and have done tons of side planks, that's no big deal. And they might even be able to do progressions of side plank where they add on and make it more challenging, like side plank, lift the leg. This adds more load to the pose. There are things you can do to make it harder. But then there are people for whom a full side plank just is maybe too much load for their shoulder, their wrist, wherever. So the loads involved in the pose are just more than their body is currently prepared to handle. So in that case, then someone like that would be better suited not to worry about, is my hand a few degrees forward or down? That's not the question. The question is what are some regressions of side plank? How can I back off? If I were a yoga teacher, which I am, but if we're yoga teachers, how can we offer regressions of the poses that we teach to help meet our students where they currently are today? That's really all that we can do as yoga teachers. We're not in our students' individual bodies. We don't know how well adapted they are. All we can really do is offer different versions of poses and give our students the agency and the autonomy to make their own decisions about the variations of the poses that they choose. So perhaps if one is really concerned about shoulder injury in side plank, instead of micromanaging and worrying about tiny little differences in alignment, perhaps just teaching some intentional and intelligent, a selection of regressions and maybe even progressions, depending on your student base. But if this is quote, full side plank or something, you can regress the pose by taking the top foot to the floor and doing staggered side plank. So this will be a little less load. You could also take the bottom knee to the floor, something like this. This would be a lot less load. So there are ways, and also you could take the bottom hand up on a block. So elevating the hand takes a little more load out of the shoulder, sends a little more load to the lower body. I don't have a yoga block with me to demo that, but you could do that. That would be a nice regression for side plank too. So there are lots of ways that we can just offer different versions of the pose and allow our students to choose the variation that meets their body where they are. That would really be the movement science-based way to approach not only this question about side plank and placement of the bottom hand, but also just injury prevention in yoga in general. It's not our job as yoga teachers to keep every individual like completely safe. Like that's not possible. Injury isn't about alignment, it's about load and how well someone's body is adapted to handle the loads that are being suggested or exposed to them. So I just kind of want to circle back. We're almost done here. But circle back to when that yoga teacher asked me that question about finding all the conflicting information and she was so confused. The question was longer. That I didn't read the whole question, but she felt stressed and was like worried that she had injured all of her students' shoulders by teaching side plank with the hand underneath. So she was, wondering what I thought about that. And my response to her was, good question, to ask about this. And I'm definitely familiar with the conflicting and strong opinions on this topic. But from a movement science perspective, both versions of side plank are just fine. And we don't need to stress about this small alignment detail. It's just not something that we need to worry about as yoga teachers. Instead of tiny micromanagement changes in alignment, just think overall about load and can you regress the loads? Can you progress the loads? Can you give your students options and let them choose for themselves? Because that's all that we can do as yoga teachers. I would just suggest that students place their hand wherever feels strong for them. Place your hand in a position that feels like a strong position for you, and then feel strong in your side plank. So hopefully that helps put this question in perspective. And if you appreciated this content, subscribe to my channel so that you can stay up to date on all the tips that I share, and also consider signing up for my email list. The link is in the description because I share lots of great movement science info for free through my email list.